The massive space station gleamed like a silver pearl against the backdrop of endless stars. Inside its brightly lit competition arena, Jack Thompson stood quietly, his modified railgun resting against his shoulder. He was the only human among the 200 competitors gathered for the annual Interstellar Marksmanship Championship. The alien participants around him carried weapons that looked like they belonged in a dream. Sleek energy rifles that hummed with power, targeting systems that could calculate 1,000,000 trajectories in seconds, and auto-aiming assists that made missing virtually impossible. Their weapons glowed with different colors: blue, green, and purple beams ready to strike targets with perfect accuracy. Jack looked down at his own weapon. The railgun was black and simple, with only a few modifications visible on its surface. It fired metal projectiles, actual physical bullets, something that made the aliens shake their heads in disbelief. He could hear them whispering and snickering. "Look at that ancient thing," one of the tall, gray-skinned aliens said to another. "I heard they still use explosion-powered weapons on their planet too." Primitive species. Commander Val, the champion from the Advanced Federation, walked past Jack with an air of superiority. His silver skin reflected the arena's lights, and his large black eyes looked down at the human with barely concealed amusement. "I hope you don't accidentally hurt yourself with that. What do you call it?" "Gun." He spoke perfect English, but his tone dripped with mockery. "It gets the job done," Jack replied simply, checking his weapon's magnetic coils one last time. He had spent months preparing for this competition, but not for the reasons anyone suspected. The station's AI announced the beginning of the preliminary rounds. Holographic targets appeared throughout the massive arena, some stationary, others moving in complex patterns. The arena itself was a technological marvel, filled with gravity generators that created varying fields of pull and push, making each shot a calculated challenge. Commander Val stepped up first. His energy rifle hummed to life, and with practiced ease, he hit target after target. Perfect shots, perfect scores. The crowd of alien spectators chittered and clicked in appreciation. The Advanced Federation's targeting systems were famous across the galaxy, and Val was proving why. Other competitors followed, each showcasing their species' advanced targeting technology. Energy beams sliced through the air with surgical precision. Not a single miss, not a single error. Then it was Jack's turn. He stepped forward, feeling hundreds of alien eyes on him. The station's director, a neutral observer named Reed, nodded for him to begin. Jack raised his railgun, took aim at the first target, and fired. The shot went wide, missing by several meters. Laughter erupted from the crowd. Commander Val's facial tentacles twitched in amusement. "Perhaps we should set up larger targets for our less advanced friend." Jack ignored them and took his second shot. This one curved strangely in the artificial gravity field and disappeared somewhere near the arena's ceiling. More laughter followed. His third and fourth shots seemed equally random, going nowhere near their intended targets. "This is embarrassing," Commander Val announced loudly. "Should we even allow such primitive weapons in this competition? It's like watching a child throw rocks at the stars." The station's director raised a hand for silence. "Every recognized species has the right to compete with their chosen weapon, Commander. Please show respect." Jack continued his seemingly poor performance, each shot appearing to be worse than the last. What none of the aliens noticed was the slight smile on his face, or the way his eyes tracked each projectile's path with careful attention. They didn't see him making minor adjustments to his gun settings between shots, or the way he consulted a small device on his wrist after each round. To them, they were watching humanity's embarrassing demonstration of inferior technology. To Jack, every missed shot was a carefully placed piece in a puzzle that none of them even knew existed. The second round of the competition began as the station's artificial sun created a golden glow across the arena. More competitors had gathered to watch the human's performance, drawn by stories of his spectacular failure in the first round. They weren't disappointed. Jack missed another shot, the metal projectile bouncing off a gravity well and spinning away into a collection net. The watching aliens didn't even try to hide their amusement anymore. Some had brought recording devices to capture what they called the primitives display. "I've seen better accuracy from malfunctioning cleaning robots," one alien said, its crystalline body sparkling with mirth. Others around it bobbed in agreement, their various appendages moving in what passed for laughter among their species. Commander Val stood at the front of the viewing area, his silver skin gleaming. He had just finished another perfect round, hitting 30 targets in under 10 seconds with his energy rifle. "You know," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "on my world, we teach our young ones with simple projectile weapons too. But they usually graduate to real technology before their first molt." The comment drew more laughter from the crowd. Jack remained focused on his task, checking readings on his wrist device between shots. Each projectile he fired seemed to follow an increasingly unusual path, curving around obstacles and through varying gravity fields before disappearing into different sections of the arena. "Perhaps the human doesn't understand how targeting works," another competitor suggested. "This one had 4 arms and carried an energy bow that could split its beam into multiple perfect shots. Should we explain that the goal is to hit the targets, not avoid them?" Station Director Reed watched from his elevated platform, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. Unlike the others, he noticed how Jack checked specific coordinates after each shot, how his misses followed patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The competition continued into its middle phase. The targets became more challenging, moving faster and phasing in and out of different dimensional planes. The alien competitors adjusted easily, their weapons targeting systems automatically compensating for the increased difficulty. When Jack's turn came again, he took longer to aim each shot. His railgun hummed differently now, the magnetic coils pulsing with a deeper tone. The projectiles he fired took even stranger paths, some seeming to curve completely backward before vanishing into the station's structure. "I think his weapon is broken," Commander Val announced, walking over to where Jack stood. "Though it's hard to tell with such outdated technology. Tell me, human, do you actually aim at anything, or do you just point and hope?" Jack lowered his railgun and looked at the alien commander. "Every shot goes exactly where it needs to go," he said quietly. This response confused the aliens. How could he claim accuracy when he hadn't hit a single target? The day's competition was drawing to a close. The scoreboard showed Commander Val and the other alien competitors with perfect or near-perfect scores. Jack's score sat at 0, the lowest in the championship's history. "I've seen enough," Commander Val declared. "This is an insult to our competition. Using primitive projectile weapons in a modern accuracy contest. It's like bringing a stone axe to a starship race." As the aliens continued their mockery, Jack fired his final shot of the day. The projectile curved impossibly through 3 different gravity fields, ricocheted off a support beam, and disappeared into a maintenance shaft. He nodded to himself and made one last note on his wrist device. None of the laughing aliens noticed the slight changes in the station's background hum, or how the magnetic field readings in certain sections had shifted ever so slightly. They were too busy celebrating their superiority to notice that every failed shot had followed a precise, calculated path, or that Jack Thompson was the only competitor who smiled as he left the arena that day. The third day of the competition brought more of the same. The alien competitors continued their perfect performances, while Jack's shots seemed to get even stranger. His railgun's magnetic coils now hummed at different frequencies for each shot, drawing more confused looks from the spectators. Director Reed sat in his observation platform, watching Jack with increasing interest. Unlike the others, he had noticed patterns in the human's apparent failures. Each missed shot followed careful trajectories through the station's gravity fields, disappearing into maintenance areas and power conduits. Another embarrassing display from the human. Commander Val announced, his energy rifle gleaming as he prepared for his own round. "Though I must admire his persistence in failing." Jack ignored the commentary, focused instead on his wrist device. The small screen showed complex calculations and magnetic field readings. Each time he fired, he checked the numbers carefully before making tiny adjustments to his railgun. One of the maintenance robots passed through the arena, its sensors sweeping the area. It paused briefly near where one of Jack's shots had vanished, then continued on its rounds. None of the aliens noticed the slight change in the robot's readings. "I've never seen someone miss in so many creative ways," a crystalline alien said, its faceted body sparkling with amusement. "Perhaps he's trying to invent a new sport. How not to hit targets." The competition moved into its advanced stages. The targets now phased between different dimensional planes, requiring split-second timing and perfect accuracy. The alien weapons handled these challenges automatically, their targeting systems adapting instantly to each new complexity. When Jack's turn came, he spent even longer setting up each shot. His railgun's hum had changed again, becoming deeper and more resonant. The projectiles he fired took paths that seemed to defy physics, curving through multiple gravity fields before vanishing into the station's structure. "I heard humans were bad at spatial awareness," Commander Val said loudly, "but this is beyond pathetic. Have you considered aiming in the general direction of the targets?" Jack lowered his weapon and looked at the alien commander. "Every shot goes exactly where it needs to go," he repeated, the same phrase he had used before. This time, Director Reed noticed something in Jack's tone, a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with his apparent failure. The station's background hum had changed slightly over the past 3 days. It was such a subtle difference that even the advanced alien sensors hadn't registered it as significant. But Jack checked his wrist device after each shot, noting the changing readings with satisfaction. During a break in the competition, one of the maintenance workers approached Director Reed. The worker spoke quietly, reporting unusual magnetic field readings in several sections of the station. Reed glanced at Jack, who was calmly adjusting his railgun, then dismissed the worker with a thoughtful look. "I don't understand why you continue," Commander Val said, approaching Jack's position. "You haven't hit a single target. Your primitive weapon clearly can't compete with our technology. Why embarrass yourself further?" Jack ran a hand along his railgun's barrel, checking the magnetic coils one last time. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "the target you're aiming at isn't the one everyone else sees." The alien commander's face tentacles twitched in confusion, but before he could respond, the station's lights flickered briefly. In the moment of darkness, Jack's wrist device showed a complex pattern of magnetic field interactions spreading through the station's structure, exactly where his missed shots had landed. As the competition prepared to enter its final day, none of the laughing aliens realized that every failed shot, every apparent miss, was actually a piece of a larger puzzle. A puzzle that Jack Thompson, with his primitive weapon and deep understanding of physics, had been carefully assembling piece by piece. Red warning lights suddenly flashed across the space station's competition arena. The station's AI voice cut through the air with an urgent tone that made everyone freeze. "Emergency alert. Massive solar flare detected. Impact in 15 minutes. All personnel report to emergency stations." The alien competitors looked up from their weapons in confusion. Commander Val's silver skin paled to an almost white shade as he checked his own readings. "That's impossible," he said. "The star is supposed to be in a quiet phase." Station Director Reed's voice came through the speakers next, tight with concern. "All competitors, this is not a drill. The station's main shields are failing. The backup systems are not responding." Panic spread through the arena. Aliens of all species began moving toward the exits, but Director Reed's next words stopped them. "The solar flare's magnitude is too high. Evacuation ships would not clear the danger zone in time. Everyone must remain in the station's core sections." Commander Val raised his energy rifle, pointing it at a practice target. When he pulled the trigger, the beam flickered weakly and died. The approaching solar flare was already affecting the energy weapon's delicate systems. "Our weapons," one of the 4 armed competitors said, fear in its voice. "They're not working." The electromagnetic interference is too strong. The station shuddered. Emergency barriers began closing around the arena's outer sections. Through the remaining viewports, they could see the star. Its surface churned with violent storms, and a massive burst of energy was heading straight for them. Radiation shields at 20% and falling, the AI announced. Critical failure imminent. Time to impact. 12 minutes. The aliens looked at their useless weapons. Centuries of technological advancement meant nothing in the face of this natural disaster. Some began to pray. Others tried to call their families. The station's magnetic containment fields are our only hope, Director Reed announced. But they're not strong enough to deflect a flare of this magnitude. We need a stronger field, Jack Thompson said, stepping forward. His voice was calm, cutting through the panic. One that could redirect the solar radiation around the station instead of trying to block it. Commander Val turned to him, his large black eyes wide. What are you talking about, human? This is no time for your primitive ideas. Jack pulled out his wrist device, showing a complex display of magnetic field patterns. Those missed shots over the past 2 days. Each one carried a specially designed deflector plate. They're positioned throughout the station's structure, waiting to be activated. The aliens stared at him in disbelief. Director Reed leaned forward on his platform. You knew this was coming. No, Jack said, working quickly on his device. But I knew it was possible. The star's been showing signs of instability for weeks. The plates create an overlapping network of magnetic deflection points. Combined with the station's existing fields, they could form a complete protection grid. Understanding dawned on Commander Val's face. Every shot, every miss was actually exactly where it needed to be, Jack finished. He looked up at the status display, showing the approaching flare. But the network isn't complete. I still need to place one final deflector. Without it, there will be a gap in the coverage. The station shook again. Through the viewports, the star's surface seemed to boil. The flare was getting closer, its deadly radiation already interfering with more and more systems. Time to impact. 8 minutes, the AI announced. Radiation shields at 15% and falling. Jack checked his railgun, making adjustments to its magnetic coils. I need to make one more shot, he said. The most difficult one yet. If I miss, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the arena understood that their lives now depended on the accuracy of the human they had spent days mocking. The station's lights flickered as another wave of electromagnetic interference hit them. In the dimness, Jack raised his railgun and began his calculations. They had one chance to survive, and it all depended on a single shot with a primitive weapon. Jack pulled up a holographic display from his wrist device, showing the station's internal structure. Dozens of small dots glowed across the diagram, marking the locations of his previously fired deflector plates. The aliens gathered around, their earlier mockery forgotten in the face of possible death. Each deflector plate is made of a special alloy, Jack explained, his fingers moving across the display. They're designed to work with the station's existing magnetic field generators. When activated together, they create a curved deflection field that can redirect the solar radiation around us. Commander Val studied the pattern of dots, his silver face showing surprise. These positions, they're perfectly calculated to create overlapping fields. Every shot you took was aimed exactly where it needed to go, Jack finished. The competition targets were never my real goal. I used the gravity fields and structural beams to curve my shots into maintenance areas and power conduits where the plates needed to be. The station shook again. Through the viewport, they could see the massive solar flare approaching, its deadly energy making the sensors scream warnings. 6 minutes to impact, the AI announced. Main shields critical. Director Reed leaned forward from his platform. How did you know where to place them? The station's internal structure is incredibly complex. Jack tapped his wrist device. I spent months studying the station's blueprints and magnetic field patterns. Each plate had to be placed at exactly the right point to amplify the existing fields. It's like setting up dominoes. They all have to be in perfect position before you knock them down. He pointed to a blinking red spot on the display. But there's a gap here, near the main reactor. Without a deflector plate in this exact position, the radiation will leak through and cook us all. The aliens looked at the location. It was behind 3 separate gravity fields, wedged between power conduits and structural supports. Even getting a clear line of sight to it seemed impossible. No targeting system could calculate a path through that. One of the 4 armed competitors said, "The gravity fields are too unstable. The interference patterns alone." "That's why I didn't use a targeting system," Jack said, checking his railgun. "Sometimes the old ways work better. The real trick isn't hitting what you aim at. It's understanding how your shot will move after it leaves the barrel." Commander Val's large eyes blinked in understanding. "The curves and bounces in your earlier shots. You were practicing. Learning how the gravity fields affect projectile movement." Jack nodded. "Pure physics. No computers, no energy beams, no auto-targeting. Just math, practice, and a lot of planning." He pulled out his last deflector plate, loading it into the railgun. The small device was barely larger than his thumb, its surface covered in complex patterns that caught the emergency lights. 4 minutes to impact, the AI warned. Radiation levels rising. The aliens watched as Jack began making rapid calculations on his wrist device. Unlike their weapons' instant targeting systems, he was working through the math himself. Gravity vectors, magnetic field strengths, Ricochet angles. "The plate has to hit that spot at exactly the right angle," he explained. "Too fast, it'll shatter. Too slow, it won't lodge in place. Wrong angle, and it won't connect with the magnetic field properly." The station's lights flickered again as another electromagnetic wave hit them. In the darkness, some of the aliens activated their own body lights, illuminating Jack as he worked. Commander Val stepped forward, his silver skin reflecting the emergency lights. "Earlier, I called your weapon primitive," he said quietly. "I was wrong, wasn't I? This whole time, we thought we were watching someone miss simple targets. When really," Jack said, finishing his calculations, "you were watching someone set up the most complex shot of all." He raised his railgun, its magnetic coils humming in the tense silence. "Now let's hope I get it right." The space station trembled as another wave of electromagnetic energy washed over it. Jack stood perfectly still, his railgun raised, eyes focused on a point that only he could see. The aliens around him held their breath, their earlier laughter replaced by desperate hope. 3 minutes to impact, the AI announced. Radiation shields failing. Through the viewport, the solar flare looked like an angry orange wall rushing toward them. The starred surface churned with violent storms, spitting more radiation into space. The station's remaining sensors screamed warnings as systems continued to fail. Jack took a deep breath. The shot he needed to make was beyond difficult. It was nearly impossible. The deflector plate had to travel through 3 separate gravity fields, curve around 2 power conduits, bounce off a structural beam at exactly the right angle, and then slip through a gap barely wider than the plate itself. "The target area is here," he said, projecting a small red dot on his holographic display. "The plate needs to hit it at exactly 47 degrees to connect with the existing magnetic field network. Too shallow or too deep, and the whole deflection grid fails." Commander Val moved closer, his silver skin reflecting the emergency lights. "How can you calculate all those variables without a targeting computer?" "I don't calculate them all at once," Jack replied, making a tiny adjustment to his railgun. "I visualize the path in segments. Each gravity field, each bounce, each curve is its own problem. Solve them one at a time, then connect the solutions." The station shook harder. Warning lights flashed across every surface as more systems failed under the electromagnetic assault. The approaching flare was already disrupting the gravity fields, making them flutter and pulse unpredictably. 2 minutes to impact, the AI warned. Main reactor stability compromised. Jack raised his railgun again. His eyes moved along an invisible path through the air, following the route the deflector plate would need to take. The aliens watched in tense silence as he made final adjustments to the weapon's magnetic coils. "Even if you hit the right spot," one of the four-armed competitors said, "how will the plate survive all those impacts and direction changes?" "The plate's shell is designed to absorb and redirect kinetic energy," Jack explained, not taking his eyes off his target path. "Each bounce and curve actually helps it maintain the speed it needs, like a river flowing around rocks." Another electromagnetic wave hit the station. The gravity fields flickered dangerously, their boundaries shifting in random patterns. Jack's window of opportunity was closing fast. 1 minute 30 seconds to impact, the AI announced. All non-essential systems shutting down. Director Reed's voice came through the crackling speakers. "Thompson, if you're going to take this shot, it has to be now. The gravity fields are becoming too unstable." Jack nodded. His finger tightened on the trigger. Every calculation, every practice shot, every moment of preparation had led to this. He could feel the weight of hundreds of alien eyes on him, all their lives depending on this one shot with a primitive weapon. 1 minute to impact. The railgun hummed as its magnetic coils charged. Jack made one final, tiny adjustment to his aim. The path he needed to thread was impossibly complex, through shifting gravity fields, around vital equipment, bouncing off structure at precise angles. 1 fraction of a degree wrong at any point would mean death for everyone on the station. 45 seconds to impact. Commander Val stepped forward. "Human, Jack, I'm sorry we laughed at your weapon. We didn't understand." "Save it," Jack said quietly, his focus absolute. "Making this shot will be thanks enough." The station groaned as the flare's outer edges reached them. Metal creaked, lights flickered, and the gravity fields pulsed like living things. Jack took one last breath, feeling time slow down around him. 30 seconds to impact. He pulled the trigger. The deflector plate shot from Jack's railgun with a sharp crack. Everyone watched as it entered the first gravity field, its path curving exactly as Jack had planned. The plate spun through the distorted space, its specially designed surface glinting in the emergency lights. 25 seconds to impact. The plate hit the first structural beam, bouncing at a precise angle. Some of the aliens gasped as they realized what they were seeing. Each impact wasn't random, but perfectly calculated. The plate's trajectory was like a dance through the station's complex internal structure. 20 seconds. Through the second gravity field, the plate's path curved again. It threaded between 2 power conduits with barely a millimeter to spare. The aliens watched in amazement as Jack's primitive projectile navigated obstacles that would have confused their most advanced targeting systems. 15 seconds to impact. The final gravity field was the most unstable, its boundaries wavering from the approaching solar flare. The plate entered it at exactly the right speed and angle, using the field's fluctuations to gain the last bit of momentum it needed. 10 seconds. With a soft ping, the deflector plate struck its target. Emergency lights across the station turned green as the plate locked into place, connecting with the magnetic field network Jack had spent 2 days creating. "Activating deflection grid," Jack said, his fingers flying across his wrist device. All around the station, the carefully placed deflector plates hummed to life. They created a web of magnetic fields that overlapped and reinforced each other, forming a protective bubble around the station. 5 seconds. The solar flare struck with the force of 1,000 storms, but instead of tearing through the station, the deadly radiation curved around them. Jack's magnetic deflection grid glowed blue as it redirected the massive energy, splitting it like a river around a rock. Commander Val stared through the viewport, his silver face reflecting the awesome display. "Incredible," he whispered. "Your missed shots, the primitive weapon, you turned the entire station into a survival system." "Radiation levels holding steady," the AI announced. "Deflection grid at full power. Station integrity maintained." The aliens burst into cheers. The same beings who had laughed at Jack's weapon now crowded around him, offering praise and apologies in a dozen different languages. Director Reed's voice came through the speakers, thick with emotion. "Thompson, you magnificent human. You didn't just save yourself. You saved everyone on this station. Over 2,000 lives." Jack smiled as he powered down his railgun. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the best ones. You don't always need fancy targeting computers or energy beams. Sometimes you just need to understand the basic physics and plan ahead. The flare continued to rage outside, but they were safe within their magnetic bubble. Through the viewport, they could see Jack's deflection grid creating beautiful patterns as it redirected the deadly radiation. It would be another hour before the flare passed completely. Commander Val stepped forward, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine respect. "We thought we were so advanced with our energy weapons and targeting systems, but while we focused on hitting targets, you were solving a much bigger problem." "There's nothing wrong with advanced technology," Jack replied, watching his magnetic field readings stabilize. "But it's dangerous to forget the fundamental principles behind it. Understanding basics like gravity, momentum, and magnetic fields, that's what saved us today." As the danger passed and systems began returning to normal, the aliens looked at their complex energy weapons with new eyes. They had learned an important lesson. True advancement wasn't about having the fanciest technology, but about understanding the underlying principles and using them creatively. The competition scoreboard still showed Jack with 0 points for target hits, but as he stood in the arena, surrounded by grateful aliens whose lives he had saved, it was clear who the real winner was. Sometimes the best shot wasn't the one that hit the target. It was the one that changed everyone's perspective.